They say history is written by the victors. But what about the stories that never made it into the history books? What about the men and women who volunteered for missions so dangerous, so impossible, that their own commanders gave them less than a 50% chance of survival? Picture this. It's 1943. You're sitting in a briefing room somewhere in England. The officer at the front just told you that you'll be parachuting behind enemy lines with nothing but a radio, a fake identity, and a cyanide pill hidden in your collar. Your mission? To survive long enough to send back intelligence that could change the course of the war. Most people know about D-Day. They've heard of the Battle of Britain, but today I'm going to tell you about the forgotten heroes. The ones who operated in the shadows, whose names were classified for decades, and whose incredible acts of courage have only recently come to light. This is their story. World War II wasn't just won on the beaches of Normandy or in the skies over London. It was won in the dark alleys of occupied Paris, in the freezing mountains of Norway, and in the dense jungles of Burma. It was won by people whose names you've probably never heard, doing things that sound more like fiction than fact. Today, we're diving deep into 3 of the most dangerous missions of the entire war. Missions that required not just bravery, but a willingness to accept almost certain death. We're talking about operations that were so secret, even the families of these heroes didn't know what they'd done until decades after the war ended. These aren't your typical war stories. There are no grand armies here, no massive tank battles. Instead, we're looking at small groups of extraordinary individuals, sometimes just 1 or 2 people, who changed the course of history through acts of incredible daring. We'll meet the saboteurs who crippled Nazi Germany's atomic bomb program. We'll discover the female spy who became one of the most decorated women in British military history. And we'll uncover the story of commandos who undertook a raid so audacious that Winston Churchill himself called it the greatest raid of all time. These are the forgotten heroes of World War II. And it's time their stories were told. Let's start in Norway, 1943. The Nazis have occupied the country for 3 years, and deep in the mountains, at a place called Vemork, they're doing something that terrifies Allied intelligence. They're producing heavy water, a critical component for building an atomic bomb. If Hitler gets the bomb first, the war is over. The free world loses. British and American scientists know this, and they know that the Vemork plant, built into the side of a cliff and heavily guarded, is producing the world's only significant supply of heavy water. Something has to be done. The plant has to be destroyed. But here's the problem. Vemork is considered impregnable. It sits at the bottom of a deep gorge, surrounded by steep cliffs on all sides. The only road in is heavily guarded. Guard towers watch every approach. The Germans believe it's impossible to attack. They're almost right. The British try first with Operation Freshman in November 1942. They send in commandos on gliders. It's a disaster. The gliders crash in the Norwegian mountains. The survivors are captured and executed. Not a single man makes it to the target. But the mission is too important to abandon. So they try again. This time they turn to the Norwegian resistance. Men who know the terrain, who can survive in the brutal winter conditions, and who have everything to lose. The team is small, just 6 men initially, codenamed Gunnerside. Their leader is Joachim Ronneberg, just 23 years old. These aren't professional soldiers in the traditional sense. They're engineers, students, regular guys who happen to be absolutely fearless. The plan is insane. They'll parachute into Norway in the dead of winter. They'll meet up with an advance team that's already there, frozen and starving after months in the wilderness. Then they'll ski across one of the most hostile environments on Earth, break into a fortress, sabotage the heavy water production, and somehow escape. On the night of February 16, 1943, they jump. The temperature is far below zero. They land scattered across the Norwegian wilderness, with their equipment spread over miles of snow and ice. It takes them days just to regroup. When they finally meet the advance team, what they find is shocking. These men have been living in a tiny hut for months, surviving on moss and whatever they can hunt. They're half-starved, frostbitten, pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. But they're ready to fight. The combined team of 9 men begins the approach to Vemork. They ski for days through blizzards, avoiding German patrols, sleeping in the snow. When they finally reach the gorge, they face their biggest challenge yet. The plan was to enter through the front, using fake uniforms and forged papers. But when they scout the facility, they realize the security is even tighter than expected. That approach will never work. Ronneberg makes a decision that saves the mission. They'll go down into the gorge, down the steep icy cliff that the Germans think is impossible to climb, cross the frozen river at the bottom, then climb up the other side directly to the plant. It's terrifying. One slip and you fall hundreds of feet to your death. The ice is slick, the cliff face nearly vertical in places. And they have to do this in complete darkness, carrying weapons and explosives. But they make it. They reach the plant and find a way in through a cable tunnel, an entrance so small and unlikely that it isn't even guarded. Once inside, they move through the facility like ghosts. They know exactly where to go because they've memorized the blueprints. They've rehearsed this mission so many times they could do it blindfolded. They reach the heavy water storage room. And here's where things get tense. They need to set the explosives carefully. Too much, and they might kill Norwegian workers in the building above. Too little, and the mission fails. A Norwegian guard walks by outside. The saboteurs freeze. The guard's footsteps echo in the corridor. He pauses. They're certain they've been discovered. But then the footsteps continue. The guard walks away, never knowing how close he came to stumbling onto the most important sabotage mission of the war. They set the charges with shaking hands. 30-second fuses, barely enough time to get clear. Ronneberg lights the fuses, and they run. The explosion, when it comes, is perfectly calculated. The heavy water containers are destroyed completely. Months of production, gone in an instant. But the building still stands, and the Norwegian workers are safe. Now comes the escape. The Germans are immediately on high alert. Thousands of troops flood the area. The saboteurs split up. Some try to escape to Sweden, skiing hundreds of miles through enemy territory. Others go into hiding in Norway. Against all odds, every single one of them survives. The mission is a complete success. The Nazis never recover their heavy water production. Their atomic bomb program is crippled. Years later, physicists would confirm what the Allies suspected. Without that heavy water, Hitler's atomic program had no chance of success. And here's the remarkable thing. This mission, one of the most important of the entire war, was accomplished without firing a single shot. 9 men, operating in the winter darkness, changed history. Joachim Ronneberg lived until 2018, dying at the age of 99. When asked about the mission decades later, he was characteristically humble. "We were just doing what had to be done," he said. Anyone would have done the same. But that's not true. Very few people could have done what they did. These were true heroes, operating in impossible conditions, risking everything for a mission they knew might fail. Now let's talk about someone who might be the most remarkable person you've never heard of. Her name was Nancy Wake, and by the end of the war, she was on the Gestapo's most wanted list with a 5 million franc bounty on her head. The Gestapo called her the White Mouse, because no matter what they did, they couldn't catch her. Nancy's story doesn't start with heroism. It starts in 1930s Paris, where she's working as a journalist, living the glamorous expatriate life. She's beautiful, charming, loves to party, and seems like the last person who would become a saboteur and resistance fighter. But then, she sees something that changes her forever. While reporting in Vienna in 1933, she witnesses Nazi brown shirts attacking Jewish people in the streets. She sees them beat an elderly Jewish man nearly to death, while crowds watch and do nothing. In that moment, Something hardens inside her. She makes a decision. If the Nazis ever threaten her world, she will fight back. And then they do. France falls in 1940. Nancy is living in Marseille with her husband Henri Fiocca, a wealthy industrialist. She could sit out the war in relative comfort. Instead, she begins smuggling Allied soldiers and refugees out of France, right under the noses of the Gestapo. She's brilliant at it. Her cover is perfect. She's just a wealthy socialite, living it up while France burns. The Germans see her at parties and cafes, always laughing, always drinking champagne. They have no idea that she's running an entire escape network, hiding people in her own home, forging documents, bribing officials. But the Gestapo isn't stupid. They know someone is helping Allied soldiers escape, and they're determined to find out who. They start closing in. In 1943, Nancy has to run. She tries to get Henri to come with her, but he refuses. He'll stay and protect their home, he says. He'll be fine. Nancy escapes over the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, a harrowing journey where many refugees die from exposure or are shot by border guards. She makes it to England and immediately volunteers for the Special Operations Executive, Britain's secret organisation for sabotage and espionage behind enemy lines. The SO training is brutal. It's designed to break people, to weed out anyone who isn't absolutely committed. Nancy not only passes, she excels. Her instructors note that she's one of the best students they've ever seen. She can kill a man with her bare hands, pick any lock, blow up a bridge, forge any document. And perhaps most importantly, she can lie convincingly under pressure. In April 1944, just before D-Day, Nancy parachutes back into France. She's one of the few female saboteurs the SO sends behind enemy lines, and she's about to become a legend. She lands in the Auvergne region of central France and immediately links up with the local resistance, the Maquis. These are tough men, rural fighters who live in the forests and mountains. They're not used to taking orders from anyone, certainly not from a woman. But Nancy changes their minds quickly. On one of her first operations, they ambush a German convoy. In the firefight, a German officer tries to escape. Nancy chases him down and kills him with her bare hands. The Maquis never question her authority again. She becomes their leader, eventually commanding over 7,000 resistance fighters. She coordinates parachute drops of weapons and supplies. She plans and executes sabotage operations. She fights in gun battles against the Gestapo and the SS. And she does all of this while maintaining her cover whenever necessary. There's a famous story about Nancy walking into a Gestapo checkpoint, flirting outrageously with the officers, and walking out with intelligence about German positions that leads to a successful ambush the next day. But not everything goes perfectly. The Gestapo is still hunting for the White Mouse, and they're getting closer. They never figure out that Nancy Wake and the White Mouse are the same person. But they know someone is organizing the resistance in the Auvergne. The pressure is incredible. There are times when Nancy doesn't sleep for days. She's constantly moving, constantly one step ahead of capture. She survives multiple ambushes. She watches friends die. She personally kills dozens of enemy soldiers. And then, after the war ends, she learns the truth about her husband. The Gestapo did catch up to Henri. They tortured him, trying to find out where Nancy was. He never talked. They executed him in 1943. Nancy blames herself for the rest of her life. If I hadn't married him, she said years later, he would have lived. But here's what makes Nancy's story even more remarkable. After the war, when they're handing out medals and honors, Nancy is largely forgotten. France awards her the Legion of Honor and the Croix de Guerre. Britain gives her the George Medal. America gives her the Medal of Freedom, but she can't settle back into normal life. She's tried peacetime, and it doesn't fit anymore. She's been to war, seen terrible things, done terrible things. How do you go back to parties and small talk after that? Nancy moves to Australia, her birth country, and mostly disappears from public view. She doesn't like talking about the war. When journalists track her down for interviews, she's more likely to talk about how much she enjoyed the champagne than about the operations she led or the people she killed. "I hate wars and violence," she said once, "but if they'd killed me, there would have been 2 less of them instead. I killed 2 of them, so it was 2 less." By the time she died in 2011, at the age of 98, Nancy Wake was the most decorated servicewoman of the entire war. But most people had never heard of her. Think about that. The woman with a 5 million franc bounty on her head. The woman who commanded thousands of resistance fighters. The woman who personally killed Gestapo agents and SS officers. The woman who cycled hundreds of miles through enemy territory to re-establish radio contact with London. Forgotten. That's why these stories matter. That's why we need to remember the forgotten heroes. For our final story, we're going to talk about an operation so audacious, so seemingly impossible, that when the planners first proposed it, they were told they were insane. It's March 1942. The war is going badly for the Allies. German U-boats are sinking hundreds of ships in the Atlantic. The British Navy is stretched thin. And then intelligence receives terrifying news. The Tirpitz, Germany's most powerful battleship, is preparing to break out into the Atlantic. If the Tirpitz gets loose in the shipping lanes, it could be catastrophic. This ship is a monster, over 800 feet long, armed with massive guns, heavily armored. It could sink convoy after convoy before anyone could stop it. There's only one British ship that can fight the Tirpitz on equal terms, Prince of Wales. But if the Prince of Wales is damaged and needs repairs, there's only one dock in the Atlantic capable of handling it. The Normandy dock at Saint-Nazaire, in occupied France. And here's where British strategic thinking gets interesting. If they can destroy that dock, then the Tirpitz can't risk sailing into the Atlantic. If it gets damaged, there's nowhere to repair it. The ship becomes useless, so the plan becomes simple in concept, impossible in execution. Send a raiding force to Saint-Nazaire and blow up the dock. Saint-Nazaire is one of the most heavily defended ports in occupied Europe. It's on the French Atlantic coast, miles up the Loire River. The Germans have fortified it extensively with anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, concrete bunkers, and thousands of troops. The dock itself is massive, nearly 1,200 feet long, the largest dry dock in the world at the time. The British plan is absolutely crazy. They're going to take an old American destroyer, the HMS Campbelltown, pack it with 5 tons of explosives, and ram it into the dock gates. Then commandos will storm ashore, destroy the dock's pumping stations and machinery, and somehow escape before the Germans kill them all. The odds of success, slim to none. The odds of survival, even worse. They ask for volunteers. Every single man steps forward. The raid is scheduled for the night of March 28, 1942. The Campbelltown is heavily modified. They cut down her smokestacks and superstructure to make her look more like a German destroyer. They weld armor plating around key positions. And they hide the 5 tons of explosives deep in her bow on a time delay fuse. Alongside the Campbelltown, they send a flotilla of small motor launches carrying commandos. Over 600 men in total are part of the operation. The journey to Saint-Nazaire is tense. They're sailing through U-boat-infested waters, hoping they won't be spotted. They fly a German flag and hope that in the darkness, any ships that see them will be confused long enough for them to get through. It almost works. They make it all the way to the mouth of the Loire River before a German patrol boat challenges them. The British signal officer does something brilliant. He responds in German, using authentic signal codes that had been captured earlier. The German patrol boat, confused, hesitates. Those few minutes of confusion are enough. The raiding force enters the river, but then the searchlights come on. Suddenly the night becomes day, and the Germans realize what's happening. Every gun in Saint-Nazaire opens fire at once. It's hell. Tracer fire lights up the sky. Shells explode in the water. The small motor launches are getting torn apart. Men are dying before they even reach shore, but Commander Stephen Beatty, in command of the Campbelltown, keeps going. Shells are hitting his ship. Fire is spreading on the deck. Men are screaming. And he aims straight for the dock gates. At 1:34 am, the Campbelltown hits the gates at full speed. The impact is massive. The ship's bow crushes into the steel gates like a spear, embedding itself deep into the structure. It's exactly where it needs to be. Now the commandos have to hold the area long enough to destroy the pumping stations. They pour off the Campbelltown under withering fire. Some of the motor launches make it to shore. Most don't. The Germans are everywhere, firing from bunkers and rooftops. The British fight like demons. Small groups of commandos storm the pumping stations with explosives. They blow up everything they can find. Pumps, motors, electrical systems. They fight room to room through the port facilities. But they're outnumbered and outgunned. The escape plan, getting back on the motor launches, is falling apart. Most of the launches are sinking or destroyed. The men start to realize that they're not getting out of this. Some fight until they run out of ammunition, then surrender. Some die fighting. A few incredibly brave or incredibly lucky ones make it back to the motor launches that are still afloat and escape. As dawn breaks, the Germans have captured over 200 British commandos. They're proud of defeating the raid. They think they've won. But then, at noon the next day, while German officers are actually touring the Campbelltown, the explosives detonate. The explosion is massive. It destroys the dock gates completely. It kills hundreds of German soldiers and naval personnel who are in the area. The blast is so powerful it sends debris hundreds of feet into the air and shatters windows a mile away. The Normandy dock is completely destroyed. It won't be operational again until 1947. And the strategic effect is exactly what the British hoped for. The Tirpitz never ventures into the Atlantic. The threat is neutralized. But the cost is terrible. Of the 600+ men who took part in the raid, only about half make it back to England. Many are captured. Many are killed. The Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honour, is awarded to 5 men from the raid, the most VCs ever awarded for a single operation. Dozens more receive other decorations for valour. Winston Churchill wasn't exaggerating when he called it the greatest raid of all time. It achieved its objective against impossible odds. It showed that no German installation, no matter how heavily defended, was truly safe. But for the men who were there, who fought through that nightmare of fire and explosions, who watched their friends die on the docks of St. Nazaire, the glory probably felt hollow. They did what they had to do. Many paid the ultimate price. Lieutenant Commander Beatty, who rammed the Campbelltown into the dock, survived. He was captured and spent the rest of the war as a POW. When he was finally released in 1945, he received the Victoria Cross from King George VI. Years later, when asked about the raid, Beatty said something that captures the spirit of all these stories. We were just ordinary men, asked to do an extraordinary thing. And we did it because it needed doing. 3 stories, 3 missions that should have been impossible. And in each case, ordinary people did extraordinary things. Joachim Ronneberg and his team, skiing through the Norwegian winter to destroy Hitler's atomic bomb program. Nancy Wake, the White Mouse, killing Gestapo agents and commanding thousands of resistance fighters. The raiders of St. Nazaire, sailing into certain death to destroy a dock and neutralize Germany's most powerful battleship. These are the forgotten heroes of World War II. Not forgotten because what they did wasn't important. What they did was absolutely critical. Forgotten because their operations were classified for decades. Forgotten because they didn't seek glory. Forgotten because they were humble about their achievements. But we remember them now. We remember that courage doesn't always come with fanfare and medals. Sometimes